Hello everyone and welcome back once again. So in today's video, we are now going to start the actual development process. In the previous video, actually, you saw how we obtained our data. So we downloaded our data and we saved our data to some a database. So for that case, we were using the MongoDB database. So you actually saw how the process setting up a database, downloading the data, as well as storing our data in the MongoDB database. So today we are going to start with the first component in a typical machine learning system, which is all about the data ingestion process. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing today. So again, before we get started, please subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so that you never miss any of these video updates, as well as share, like, and also comment. Okay, so we are going to start with all that said. Let's get started. So in the previous sessions, we were able to, just to do a recap, we were able to set up our custom exception. This is supposed to be. We were able to set up our custom exception. Then we were able to also include some of the constants. For example, this the config file, the params.yaml, the schema, the metrics file, all these we were able to include this as part of the constants. Okay, so this is the work that we did previously, just to set up everything before we get rolling. So today we are going to start with the first component, which is all about the data ingestion. So I'll be following a distinct layout. So if I may, so in our README file, let me update the sequence of how we are going to be doing this project. So the first one will be all about what we did yesterday, about the constants. So here we talked about for example, the logger, that's a constant. We also talked about the exception. So setting up the custom exception, it is also things like that. Then after the constants, we will need to update our config. So after updating the configuration, then the next step is about the schema. We need to also update the schema. Just a second. Okay, so we need constants, then we update our configuration, then we move to the schema. Then after the schema, we set up the parameters. Then we set up our entity. So from here, we are now doing the actual modular coding itself. So entity, then we set up our config in the configuration manager. Then after that, we create our components. The components, we set up now our pipeline. And after the pipeline, we can now move on to so this one is supposed to be pipeline. Then after the pipeline, we can set up our main.py, where we can execute all the entire components in a single file. That will be the main.py. Then from here we can set up maybe the prediction pipeline, because that is somehow different from the other pipelines, because the prediction pipeline is all about the user interacting with the web application, So when the user inputs data, then that data needs to have its pipeline. So that will be coming in the later stages of this development process. So yesterday we did the constants, the logo exception, etc. Then today we start by updating the configuration. So under the config, we have the config.yaml file, and this file will contain essentially things to do with the paths and all that. So we need to set our config. So config.yaml. So I remember yesterday we talked about something to do with the artifacts folder. So under this, you will see how that artifacts folder will be coming about. So we are going to set that folder right now. So we set the artifacts, the root folder. So artifacts underscore root artifacts. So the first thing will be about the data ingestion process. Under the data ingestion process, I'm going to specify what we are going to be dealing under the data ingestion. So we are going to set our root directory. So under the root directory, it will be the data itself will be stored in some folder, and this folder will be under the artifacts as the general folder. Then under artifacts, we're going to create another folder that will contain the data itself. So that folder, we're going to name it as artifacts / data ingestion. So that is the folder that will contain the data itself. Then remember, we are reading data from the MongoDB server. So I can specify the Mongo URI. So I think I had prepared that. So I can just copy. Or we can go back to what we did previously. So we can just copy that. So that's the URI. Then we can state the database name. So so the database name. So the database name is battery experiments. Then we can also specify the collection name. So the collection name, you can say battery meaning rule, battery RUL. So we have the root directory. So this is the directory that will store our data that we are going to download from the MongoDB server. Then this is the Mongo URI. So this is something like a link for us to able to download that data. Then in the MongoDB, we are looking for data under the database name battery experiments. Then under battery experiments, we have data under the collection name battery RUL. Okay, so this is the sequence that we are going to be following for us to import data into the model itself. So then after that, we can go to the experiment. So we're going to start by experimenting our code. So something like a trial, something like a prototype, something like that. Okay. So when we build a prototype for that, and we see that it is executing successfully, then from that, we are going to now separate that code into the different distinct components, which include the entity, the configuration manager, the different components, and essentially the pipeline. Our pipeline is essentially the instructions to follow when executing this code. Okay, so we are going to start building the data ingestion. So for the data ingestion, we start by simply importing the necessary libraries for that. So libraries such as the data class from data class, pathlib, pymongo, because you are reading data from the MongoDB. So from pymongo, import the Mongo client. Then we need to convert our data into a pandas data frame for easier manipulation. Then we also import the OS library. So after this, we need to also import a specific constants. So before we continue, I had forgotten, we need to set up the constants or the under the utils folder. We have the folder commons. So utils, under utils we have the folder commons. So we need to set up this. So I've just prepared that code. So as I said, with the utils, basically these are the common functions that we do require for our model. Don't worry about this. So yesterday, actually, when you go to the templates folder, yesterday we were doing battery rule, but I just slightly changed the package name. So it's not entirely different or something complex. So instead of battery rule, I changed that the package name to rule battery. So it's not something that I've changed that has a higher. We were at the commons. So for the commons, we importing the necessary libraries. So for exception handling, as I said yesterday, we created our own custom exception, but we can also use the box error from an inbuilt way of detecting these errors. Okay, so these are just the other common imports: import sys, import YAML, JSON, joblib, numpy, decorator for runtime type checking. Ensure that you're only raising the correct. So for the ensure decorator to be used on functions with annotations. Runs type checks to enforce annotations. Raises ensure error if any argument passes to asterisk. Okay, so it returns a value of asterisk f if not the types specified by the annotations. So it makes sure that we are only raising the correct, or we are only using the specified annotations. Okay, so that's for the ensure annotations. Then the ensure dictionary that allows for dot notation process, the config box, then the path typing import any. So in case we want to we have the, as you can see, we have YAML files, so we need to read those YAML files. So we can just read YAML. So this function will be, when we use this function, it will be solely, the sole purpose will be about reading the different YAML files. So we don't need to create, when we want to read a YAML file, we don't need to constantly start creating functions to read those YAML files. You can just import this module, this module, ensure we have the read YAML file in that, and it will be easier for us to read those YAML files. So if you want to create directories, then we can just use this function. So it will just import it, then it will help us create those directories. For saving some objects in our file, then you can use this function. When you want to load an object, for example, if we have the preprocessor object, so if you want to save that object, you can use this function. And if you want to load that object, you can also use this function to load that object. So these are some of the common or the redundant, you can call them the redundant functions that we need in our code, so to help us perform those tasks. Okay, so that is for the commons. So under this again, so under the data ingestion, so we need to import some of these common function, and one of them is, for example, the read YAML, also the create directories. So we will import those. So again, from src, so from src dot rule battery, we need to go to the utils, then constants. I think we're dealing with commons, so you're going to import the read YAML. We're also going to import the create directories. Also under the constants, this one we need also to import these files. So I'll just import the first three because those are the most for the metrics part. This one will be used way later into, I think, during the latter stages after the model evaluation. So right now I don't need it at the moment, but when that time comes, we'll just import it. But at this moment, let's use the first three. So we need to import that. So again, we can say from src rule battery dot constants. This one constants. We need to import. We can use the asterisk just to import everything, or you can specify the necessary ones. So for example, you can specify this, or you can just use this one. So let's use the asterisk so that it just imports everything. Then you need to import the logging. So from src rule battery, we're going to import logging. We are going to import logging. So the first thing after this, we need to create our entity. So entity, I will explain what I mean by entity. So at data class, we need to data ingestion config. In some cases, you will need to separate the data. You just create a separate folder for the MongoDB. Then you will just, but for this case, you don't need that. So for data class, then just copy this. So, oops, I don't need this one. So whatever we are listing under the class data ingestion config, under our entity, so you can just go back to our config.yaml. So whatever we are listing under the data ingestion is the same things that we are listing. Let me close these unnecessary files. It's essentially same thing that whatever we were listing under data ingestion as a stage, it's whatever we are listing. So we're just copying those and using those under the entity, but specifying, for example, the root directory. This is a path. Then this is something like a string, and string. Okay, so just specifying the type. So type for this is a path, or it resembles a path. Then from this one we have the string. If it was a number, then you could use a float or integer. So what is our entity? So I had prepared some file under the readme file to try to explain the different stages, entity, configuration manager. So what I'm trying to explain here is what they do, what is the input for those different sections. So for entity, so the first entity is the data ingestion config, as you can see. So the class data ingestion config. So that's our first entity. So what is this data ingestion configuration? So this data class that defines the structure of data ingestion configuration. So technically, it acts like a blueprint for how the ingestion process will be set up. So how is our ingestion process being set up? We need to query data from our MongoDB. So under this, you can query that data in the MongoDB, and extract or import that data from that MongoDB. Then after you import that, you need to store that data in some folder, okay, or in some place in the model. So for that case, for us, then we created this path in the config.yaml. We created this path, and this path is the one that has a folder data ingestion, and we are going to store data in this folder. So what it does, it holds the configuration details. As you can see, the config.yaml, you are able to see those configuration details, which include the root directory, the MongoDB URI, the database name, as well as the collection name. Then the input essentially doesn't receive an input per se, but the input, we can call them as those the configuration details that we listed under the config.yaml file. Then the output for this is an instance of the data ingestion config with the specified configuration details. So that's all about our entity. Okay? So after we have created our entity, the next thing is about the configuration manager. So let's see something about the configuration manager. Again, I had prepared the configuration manager so that we can a little bit be quick. So most of the time, it's not about writing the code itself. It should be about explaining what the code is doing, so that you can have a clear picture or a clear understanding of what we are doing under this section. So the next step is about the configuration manager. Here we're just creating a configuration manager class to manage the configuration. So what is the configuration manager? Again, you can go to our README file, and we can certainly get some explanation as to what is our configuration manager, what it does, what are the inputs, and all that information. So what is the configuration manager? So it's a class that manages the configurations by reading them from the YAML files. So when you go back, you can see we are listing those the YAML files. These are coming from our constants. Okay. So the first YAML file is the config. I think it will be the config.yaml. This one here. So we have already populated that with the stage information about data ingestion. Another one is about the parameters. So parameters, essentially, it will store the parameters that the parameters for the selected machine learning algorithm. Okay. So because you have not reached there yet, we can just, instead of being empty, it will print out an error. So you can just populate it like this. So key and value. So that's the parameters. Then we have the schema. Schema is all about the data itself. For example, the column names, the data types, if you're missing values. So to check for, so it contains information about the data itself. So for our schema, again, we need to go to our schema.yaml file. Here we'll list the columns and categorically specify our input features as well as the target variable. So again, when that time comes, we'll populate this with the right information. But at the moment, we can just use the key and value, something like that, so that we are not, when we are querying this file, it should not be blank. So a blank file will print an error. Okay, so we can just at the moment do away with this, make our workspace neat. So then after that, so it reads the configuration parameters and the schema details from the YAML file. So you have seen that, I've shown you that. Then it creates the necessary directories specified in the configuration. So in the entity, we specified that we need to create a directory under this file path. So the configuration manager is going to create that directory, this one here, and then we are going to, when we query that data, it will be stored under that folder. Then the inputs paths to the configuration parameters and the schema.yaml file. So you can see, so if you, for example, this is the config file path, control, then you click on this, for example, the params. Let's say control, click on this, then it will bring you to this place, control file path. I think supposed to take you to that supposed to take you to the params.yaml file. No. Okay. So so the input is the paths, so the config file path. This one you saw, you have already explained this, and we have already explained this. So the output configuration details and a method to get the data ingestion configuration. So we are essentially doing this. We are creating a get data ingestion config object. This one here, data ingestion config object. This one here. Then the usage you'd instantiate the configuration manager to load the YAML files and then call this method to obtain the specific configuration for data ingestion. So we first instantiate the config manager, this one here. Then after that, we call this method to now obtain the specific configuration for data ingestion. And the specific configuration is we have explained. I think it entails whatever information we explained under this section. So that is the configuration manager. Then after this, we need to set up a new class, and this class will be the data ingestion component class. So it says data ingestion component class. So here we can do, let's copy one of the class. Let's copy the class itself. So we can just copy and we can just paste it here. So this is the class, the data ingestion class. So it is actually we can call this class as the what is the, forgetting that name. Okay, so the data ingestion class. So what is this class? So this class is responsible for the actual data ingestion process. So it fetches the data from the MongoDB database, and it will save this something like a CSV file. So what it does is it connects to the MongoDB, fetches the data from the collection, converts it to a data frame, and saves it to the CSV file. So this is the actual the worker itself. I'm missing that analogy anyway. So inputs. So the inputs under the data ingestion. So it's an instance of the data ingestion config that we created earlier, containing the necessary configuration details, what we created earlier. Then a data frame containing the data from the MongoDB, potentially written to a CSV file. So after we imported that, we converted that. An input will be the data that we will be reading from that MongoDB server. Okay. Then usage, it create an instance of the data ingestion. So we created that instance of the data ingestion. I think it's this one. This one. Passing in the data ingestion config details. So this one, yeah. Then you will call the import data from MongoDB to perform the actual ingestion task. So that's what we are doing under here. So we are creating this class. Then we are creating a new method that will import data from the MongoDB. So this one is just extra detail that is relevant. Then we are setting up the client, the Mongo. So the Mongo client self.config Mongo URI. So this one will be reading this. This one here, and then from here you go to the config file, then you read this. So you see how those steps are will be taking place. So from the database name, config the database name. From here, it will be going a step behind the database name, then going here to the database name and reading this. So that is the step that this is doing. So after we connect to the MongoDB, then move on to convert the collection to a data frame. So after we read that data, we need to convert into pandas data frame for easier manipulation. Then the column will contain an ID column. So that ID is something like a hash key for every instance or every row in the data. So we need to just do away with that. Then after that, we can save our data frame to the folder that we created. Okay. Then after this, we need to create something like a pipeline that will. So under the pipeline, you're trying to specify what step comes first and what step comes last. So again, from the README, you can see what we are doing. We are first initializing the config manager. So this one is the config manager. We first initializing that. The next step is about retrieving the data ingestion configuration. So we obtain this. So as you can remember, we first create our entity and the entity data ingestion config. So under this, we are creating the configuration manager. So we first set it up. Then we create the data ingestion config. Then we create the instance of the data ingestion with the configuration, this one. Then we invoke the data ingestion process. Then from here we can invoke the data ingestion process, the actual data ingestion process. Then from there we can set up a message like this, just to log that information. So this is just something like a prototype of the actual steps that we are going to take. And you can see our data contains 3 distinct phases: the entity phase, the configuration phase, and the data ingestion phase. So to chain those phases together and run them simultaneously, we need to use something like a pipeline. That's why we have this pipeline. Then from the pipeline, you have specified the steps that it should follow. So here are the steps. Then from there, let's execute this. So I'm going to open the command prompt and let's execute. So command prompt Python, and we can say this is the file, copy the relative path, and we can just paste here. Then we can press enter to execute this. And let's see if we are going to get that. So essentially what we need to get from here is we first need to create that artifacts folder, and under artifacts folder we'll have another folder. We cannot import logging from, we are having an error. Oops, there's one thing that we did not create. We did not create the logging. It's supposed to be under the rule battery. So under the init, we did not create the logger. So we'll need to create that under this file. So for the logger, let me just ensure we have that. So battery rule. Just prepare that. So this is the then change this to rule battery to match the folder name. So this is the logging information that we were missing. So we can then execute this file again. We need to create that folder, an artifacts folder. So you can see data ingestion MongoDB completed. So we need to, as you can see, we have created our artifacts folder, and under artifacts, the artifacts folder itself, we have the data ingestion folder. The data ingestion folder contains the necessary information, battery, rule, CSV, as we had requested that CSV to be saved. So data ingestion. This one here, as you can see, it resembles this name. Again, you can see that this is okay. So as you can see, the different steps. So we first did this, loaded the config.yaml file. So we read that file successfully. Then this is the information under that file. Then after that, we params.yaml was loaded successfully. Then the schema again was loaded successfully. Then we created the artifacts folder as we had instructed. Then created this directory in the artifacts data ingestion folder. Then after that, we imported the data from the MongoDB, and we created a log message to tell us that that process was executed successfully. So you can see all those, everything is. You can see that now this file is working correctly. So after this, we need now to split those different entities because we need those entities to be working. The entities, we need to group those entities together. So we start by the entity itself. So this one here. So we go to our entity folder, configuration entity. Maybe you can just name this, provide a shorter name. So you can just rename this as config entity. Config underscore entity. I think this one is so under the config.entity, we need to copy our entity, this one here. So config.entity, we need to copy this. And remember, we need to add some libraries. So data class as well as the path. So data ingestion, we need to add these two. So where is it? This one here. So we need to add the data class, then the path for this one. This is our entity. So we can just label this and say data ingestion entity. So that's it. So after our entity, the next step is the configuration manager. So we can just close this. This one is already done. You can close this one also. The log, don't think we need this one. So the next step is about the configuration manager. So I'll copy the configuration manager until the return data ingestion config. So I'll copy this, then go to the configuration, then just paste this and copy the necessary libraries that we need. So I think we do need directories and this one here. So configuration, we do need this. And we also need the data ingestion config. So the configuration, the data ingestion config, that one we need to import from entity. So again, from src rule battery dot entity config entity. We're going to import data ingestion config. So any error that any library that we are missing, I think it's okay at the moment. So after the config, we go to the components. So components, we need the data ingestion component. So data ingestion component, and the component is this one here, all the way, but just before the pipeline. Yeah, so that's the data ingestion component. So click some paste for the libraries. So we need to import a few libraries. So for the libraries, I think we need this here. I think we also need logging, if I'm not wrong. So data ingestion, So we also need the data ingestion config. This one is the data ingestion config, comes from the configuration manager. So just a little bit components from the configuration config entity. So we need to import the config entity. So we can say source code Betsy, then dot entity dot config entity, then we are going to import a data ingestion config. Anything that you are missing, everything is okay. Everything is import data from okay, import that was okay. Yeah, everything is okay. So after the components, we go to the pipeline. So remember, we're just following this. So we updated our entity, then the config, then the components. So we go to the pipeline. So to the pipeline, we have this folder pipelines, pip01 data ingestion. I'll just close this. Also, I'll close this just to make our workspace neat. Then this one is the pipeline itself. So for the pipeline, there's some things that we need to do. So for the pipeline, pip data ingestion. So we import the login. So again from src dot rule battery, going to import login. Then again from src dot rule battery config configuration. We're going to import the configuration manager. Then from C, we need to import the components. So dot components, we are going to import nope, we are missing something. Supposed to be C01 data ingestion. We're going to import the data ingestion. Then is pipeline name. So we can just call this, give it a name. So pipeline name. This will be, we call it as a data ingestion pipeline. Data ingestion pipeline. Then I'll create a class for this. So class data ingestion pipeline. Then if in itself, we don't need anything at the moment, so we'll just use pass. So def, we can call this as something like this, run self. So after this, we need to do something. We need to import the pipeline. So essentially, we're just importing this. Let's see if configuration manager, we are supposed to start with the configuration manager. No, let's just do away with this. So configuration manager, data ingestion, that's okay. Then we add with the if else if underscore name. Then we call the main, underscore main underscore. Then this one will be inside something like a try block. Inside a try block. So try pass, then exception as E. Then you can just raise E, something like that. So for this pass, add something here. So you can just do like this. So info data ingestion is supposed to be run. So this is a pipeline. So we run a pipeline. Logging, starting a pipeline name is this and this. Data ingestion pipeline. So data ingestion pipeline, data ingestion. This okay. This okay. So after this, the next step with the pipeline, no problem. So we are done with the pipeline. So this is the pipeline. The next step will be about the main.py. We are creating a single file where we can just create a simple instruction and it will execute everything. So the main.py, so I can go to the main.py. So for the main.py, import, then from src.role-battery, we're going to import logging. Then we can say from src again .role-battery, the pipelines. We're going to pipeline number 1. We're going to import the data ingestion pipeline. Then now we create a component. So create a name for this component. So we can say component 01. First component, that's the data ingestion component. So data, put it as the data ingestion component, data ingestion component. Then again, it's still the try block element. So pass. Then you can use the except as e as logging dot and say anyway, that's okay. And you can raise e. So logging dot error, we need, or we can say logging dot exception, dot exception, and e. This one is okay. Then and just pass logging info component 1. So this one will read as data ingestion component started. Then we will call the data ingestion pipeline data ingestion. Then this is supposed to be run. Okay. Then logging info, this component terminated successfully. In case of anything, we are going to raise an error. Okay, so I think we have everything sorted. Sorted. And after this, everything is sorted. So we can then just go to our main.py. So Python main.py and just execute the entire pipeline. So this will also execute. And as you can see, data ingestion component. So you can see the info data ingestion component has started. Essentially, it's just the same thing, this one here. Then we are going to get the necessary information. Then data ingestion component terminated successfully. This one here. Then okay, that's it. So we are getting two types of logs. We are getting a log information in our terminal, and also we are getting the log information from here, you can also get the same log information. Whatever you're getting in the terminal is whatever you're getting here. So this logger file, you can now save it in some storage where you can monitor the logs itself. But for this one, it's just when doing for the ones in the terminal, when you are executing this code, then you need to be certain that you are following the correct steps during execution. That's why I preferred also printing logs in the terminal, and the ones you can save it in some folder, remote database, something like that. So we have executed our data ingestion pipeline. We can see that it's working okay. So from here, we need to push this code to our Git repository. So we can say git add dot, then git status to see which files we are adding. So we can see the readme file, we updated that, the config, we updated that, the experiment, again, we updated that, the main.py. So these are essentially the files that we have modified, deleted, modified, something like that. Then after this, so we need to git commit. So git commit -m. Then for the commit, we can say data ingestion complete. And you can execute this, then it will do the commit. So it will stage. And after this, I remember with the git ignore, we are now we are not pushing our data to the git repository. Okay, so that's why we instructed that we need to avoid pushing that. So we made that reference in the git ignore file. So then after this, need to git push. So git push -u origin main. So git push -u origin main. So that will push our source code. It will push our code to the repository. Then from the repository, you are able to follow through. So I think it's done. Okay, let's go to our repository to see. Just reload it. Data ingestion complete 1 minute ago. So that's it. So data ingestion, for example, params.yaml. Remember, we just use the key and value. For the src, the source code folder, in the rule battery, we do have, we updated the components. Let's see the pipeline. So the first pipeline is the data ingestion pipeline. So you can see we have now our code. So from here, you can just clone this, and you will have the similar code in your local setup or your local workstation. Then from there, you can still execute the same. Okay, that's it. So that's all about the data ingestion process. So I wanted to be very detailed with the data ingestion process so that you are able to understand the necessary steps that you are taking with the data ingestion. So similar things will be happening, for example, with the data validation, data transformation. So when that time comes, so I think you'll be having a good understanding, a base knowledge of the steps that we are taking, why you are doing this and not this, why we are instructing our function to do this and know this. All those the steps they're taking, entity configuration, a pipeline, why we have the main.py file. Okay, so that's why I wanted to be very detailed with the data ingestion, because everything just follows the same logic or the same steps. Okay, so that's it for the data ingestion. Once again, you can subscribe to the channel, share this video so that friends, colleagues can also get an opportunity to learn. Once again, thank you for your time. See you in the next one, where we will be doing the data validation. See you.